Welcome to the store. Don't forget to subscribe, and support me.
The world outside Ed's window was a blur of routine. People shuffled through their lives, moving from place to place, their faces blank, eyes distant, as if their minds wandered elsewhere. Most of them probably didn't even realize it, how tightly their will was being controlled. The subtle manipulation began slowly, with a restless night, a troubling dream. But once the dream mages had a hold of you, they never let go. Ed sat by his small kitchen table, running a hand through his tousled hair. The steaming mug of coffee in front of him went cold as he stared at it, lost in thought. He knew what the world had become, but nobody else around him seemed to notice. A slow, creeping despair had settled over humanity like a fog, and the mages were its unseen hands. For as long as he could remember, Ed had been different. His dreams were never under their control. From a young age, he'd learned to lucid dream, to become fully aware of his dreams, to shape them, and more importantly, to resist the outside influence of the dream mages. He had been approached, more than once, in his dream world by strange figures. They'd offered him peace, quiet, everything he'd ever wanted, but Ed knew better. He refused their gifts. He fought them, even when he didn't understand who they were. In his waking hours, he researched old texts, fragments of legends, stories whispered by those who'd been labeled as conspiracy theorists or dreamers. And gradually, the truth became clear: the world was trapped in the grip of a malevolent force, and the dream mages were its puppeteers. But knowing the truth was only part of the battle. The harder task was figuring out what to do with that knowledge. One night, as Ed lay in bed, the familiar sensation of slipping into a dream washed over him, but this time, it felt different. There was a thickness to the air, a presence he couldn't ignore. He found himself standing on the edge of a vast, desolate landscape, the sky above swirling in shades of dark purple and black. Before him lay the ruins of what once had been a magnificent fortress. The walls, though broken and weathered, emanated a power Ed could feel vibrating in his bones. This was no ordinary dreamscape. He moved forward, stepping over the crumbled stones and into what had once been the heart of a towering citadel. As he explored, a realization crept into his mind: this fortress was built not by stone and mortar, but by human will, by the collective strength of those who had fought to keep their minds free. But it was in ruins now, long abandoned and overrun by the forces of the dream mages. Ed could feel their lingering presence like an icy wind whipping through the broken halls. Yet something stirred within him, an unshakable belief that this place could be restored. If it had once stood strong, it could stand again. That night, he made a decision. This fortress, this place built from the hopes, dreams, and unyielding will of humankind, would be his stronghold. He would rebuild it, brick by metaphysical brick, using every ounce of creativity and imagination he could muster. And in doing so, he would fight back. Days turned into nights, and nights into weeks as Ed honed his skills. During the day, he continued his regular life, keeping his secrets close. But at night, he delved deeper into the dream world, practicing, experimenting, and pushing the boundaries of what he could do. Slowly but surely, the fortress began to rise again. It wasn't long before he wasn't alone. Others began to appear, dreamers like him, people who had the innate ability to resist the mages' control. Some had known they were different all their lives, others had only recently begun to awaken. Together, they rebuilt the fortress, working in tandem, their shared determination transforming the landscape from a wasteland into a beacon of hope. Ed became the de facto leader of this growing group of dreamers. He taught them what he knew, shared his vision, and together they created something stronger than any of them could have imagined. The dream fortress became their sanctuary, a place where the dream mage's influence couldn't reach. But Ed knew it was only a matter of time before the mages took notice, and notice they did. One night, as the dreamers gathered inside the fortress, a cold wind howled through the halls. Ed felt it before he saw it, the dark energy of the dream mages. They had found them. The sky above the fortress twisted and churned, and out of the darkness came a torrent of nightmare creatures, each one more terrifying than the last. These were the mages' weapons, sent to sow fear and doubt among the dreamers. The battle was fierce. The dreamers fought with all their might, using the power of their minds to fend off the onslaught. Ed stood at the center of the chaos, his heart pounding in his chest as he conjured walls of light to hold back the tide. The nightmares clawed at the walls, their grotesque forms twisting and morphing as they tried to break through. Ed could feel the strain of maintaining the fortress's defenses, but he wouldn't let it fall. Not now. Not ever. Then, out of the shadows, came the worst of them all, a creature born from the deepest recesses of Ed's mind. It was an embodiment of his greatest fear, failure. Its eyes burned with a cold, blue fire as it slithered toward him, its voice a low, mocking whisper. "You cannot win," it hissed. "You will fail, just as they all have before you." For a moment, Ed faltered. The fortress walls shuddered, and cracks began to form. The nightmare creature loomed closer, feeding off his doubt, growing stronger with every passing second. He could feel the weight of it, the crushing pressure of responsibility. If he failed, if the fortress fell, all hope would be lost. The dream mages would tighten their grip on humanity, and there would be no one left to resist. But then, something shifted. From across the battlefield, Ed saw one of his allies, a young woman named Tessa, standing her ground against a swarm of nightmares. Her face was set in determination, her hands glowing with the energy of pure willpower. She wasn't giving up, and neither could he. Ed took a deep breath, closing his eyes for just a moment, centering himself. When he opened them again, the nightmare creature's taunts no longer had any power over him. "You're wrong," he said, his voice steady. "I will win. We all will." With a surge of energy, Ed unleashed a blast of light that ripped through the nightmare, disintegrating it into a cloud of smoke and shadow. The fortress walls mended themselves, and the nightmares began to retreat, their hold on the dreamers weakening. It was a hard-fought victory, but a victory nonetheless. The dream fortress stood strong, and Ed knew they had made their mark. The dream mages wouldn't stop, but neither would they. The night after their victory felt different. Ed could sense the subtle change in the air around the dream fortress, as if the very essence of the place had grown stronger. The dreamers gathered, some of them sharing quiet conversations, others still catching their breath after the battle. Despite their success, Ed knew they had only bought themselves time. The dream mages would return, stronger and more relentless. And they would need to be ready. Ed walked along the parapets, staring out into the vast dreamscape that stretched endlessly before them. The fortress, though repaired, still held scars from the attack. Some dreamers had left, too shaken by the nightmares to continue. But many remained, more determined than ever. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about freeing humanity from the invisible chains that bound them. That thought gave Ed strength, even as doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Tessa approached him, her footsteps soft on the stone walkway. "We did it," she said quietly, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but also pride. "We held them off." Ed nodded, not taking his eyes off the distant horizon. "For now. But they'll come again. And next time, they'll bring everything they've got." Tessa didn't flinch. "So will we." He turned to face her, the faintest hint of a smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "You did good out there, Tessa. You and the others." She shrugged, though he could see the weight of her own doubts reflected in her eyes. "We're all scared, Ed. We're fighting things we don't even fully understand." "I know," he replied. "But fear isn't the enemy. It's how we deal with it that matters." They stood in silence for a moment, the enormity of their task weighing on both of them. But even in the quiet, there was a sense of resolve. The dreamers weren't just defending themselves anymore, they were preparing for something bigger. And Ed knew it. The next few days were spent reinforcing the dream fortress. Ed led the efforts, working alongside the others to strengthen the defenses, to ensure that when the dream mages returned, they would find themselves facing something far more formidable than before. They practiced dream manipulation, honing their skills, pushing the limits of what they thought was possible. Every dreamer had a unique strength. Some could conjure vivid illusions, others could create powerful barriers or summon creatures of light to defend them. Together, they were building something unstoppable, but the dream mages were not idle. The assault, when it came, was swift and brutal. The air around the fortress darkened as the dream mages unleashed their most potent weapons, the nightmares of humanity itself. From the sky, shadows rained down like living entities, twisting and morphing into monstrous forms. Each one represented the deepest fears of the dreamers, from failure and loss to isolation and betrayal. It was a psychological attack as much as a physical one, designed to break their spirits. Ed stood at the front lines, his heart pounding in his chest as the first wave of nightmares crashed against their defenses. The walls of the dream fortress held, but only just. The nightmare creatures clawed and bit at the stone, their screeches echoing through the dreamscape. Around him, the other dreamers fought with everything they had, their faces etched with determination, but also fear. Ed knew they couldn't hold out forever. He raised his hands, summoning a wave of energy that rippled through the dreamscape, pushing back the nearest nightmares. But even as he fought, he could feel the toll it was taking on him. The dream mages were relentless, their power growing with every second. Then, through the chaos, he saw it, a tear in the fabric of the dream world, like a jagged wound cutting through reality. It pulsed with a sickening energy, and from within it, more nightmares poured forth. But this was different. This was the gate of dreams, the portal through which the mages could directly influence the waking world. If they managed to fully open it, there would be no stopping them. Ed's blood ran cold. He had to stop it. "Tessa," he shouted over the din of battle, catching her eye as she fended off a swarm of shadowy figures. She glanced at him, her expression one of grim understanding. "The gate, if they get through, it's over." She nodded, her face pale but resolute. "We'll hold them off. Go." Without hesitation, Ed sprinted toward the gate, weaving through the chaos of battle. The air around him felt thick, oppressive, as if the very dreamscape was fighting against him. But he pressed on, knowing that everything, his friends, his world, his very existence, depended on him reaching that tier before it was too late. The gate loomed before him, a swirling vortex of darkness and light, where the boundaries between dreams and reality blurred into something terrifying and unnatural. As he drew closer, the dream mages themselves emerged from the shadows, their forms ethereal yet menacing. Their faces were obscured, but their eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, bore into him with a mix of hatred and hunger. One of them, taller and more imposing than the others, stepped forward. Its voice was like a low, rumbling thunder, vibrating through the dreamscape. "You are too late, dreamer. The gate will open, and all of humanity will be ours." Ed clenched his fists, his mind racing. He couldn't fight them all, there were too many, and they were too powerful. But there had to be another way, and then, in a flash of inspiration, it came to him: the dream fortress wasn't just a structure. It was built from human creativity, from the collective will of those who refused to be controlled. If he could channel that energy, harness the strength of every dreamer who had ever resisted the mages, maybe, just maybe, he could close the gate, but it would take everything he had. Ed closed his eyes, focusing inward, drawing on the deep well of power within himself. He could feel the presence of the other dreamers, their will, their strength, their hope. It surged through him, filling him with a light so pure, so powerful, that it made the darkness of the mages seem small by comparison. The lead mage snarled, sensing the shift in the air. "No! You cannot," but it was too late. With a roar, Ed unleashed the full force of the dream fortress, sending a shockwave of light and energy hurtling toward the gate. The mages screamed in rage as the light consumed them, their forms disintegrating into nothingness. The gate flickered, its edges wavering, before it collapsed in on itself, sealing the tear and restoring balance to the dreamscape. The battle was over. Ed stood there, breathing heavily, as the last remnants of the nightmare creatures faded into the ether. Around him, the dreamers gathered, their faces a mix of relief and exhaustion. They had done it. They had won. But as the adrenaline faded, Ed felt the weight of everything he had lost. The sacrifices, the pain, the constant battle. It had all led to this moment, and while the victory was sweet, it was also bittersweet. Tessa approached him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, but her eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Ed. You stopped them." He shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "We did it. All of us." Together, they looked out at the dreamscape, now peaceful and still. The dream fortress stood tall, a symbol of resilience and hope. And though the dream mages were gone, Ed knew that their fight wasn't truly over. There would always be threats to freedom, always forces that sought to control and manipulate, but for now, they had won. And for the first time in a long time, Ed allowed himself to hope. Humanity was free.